Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Christiana Manpour in Kyiv, where the country is bracing itself for what could be the decisive battle in this brutal war. That's the battle for Kherson. Russia's defense minister has ordered the withdrawal of its troops from parts of the region as Ukrainian forces advance towards the city. It seems to be a major setback for Putin's war aims, but Ukrainian officials are expressing skepticism and caution, especially as the Kremlin's top security advisor visits Iran, where Western officials say he's seeking more advanced weapons. President Volodymyr Zelensky wants to ensure international support for his country's defense continues, particularly from the United States after these midterm elections. And at this pivotal time, I sat down with the president and his wife, First Lady Olena Zelenska, for a global exclusive. Their leadership and courage have driven this story and Ukraine's remarkable resistance. But it is clear the war is taking its toll. They were tired but determined. Here's our conversation.
A global exclusive. This is a very, very intense interview coming from the heart of the leader of the Ukrainians towards how relentless that the war has been against their own people, and also acknowledging the fact that though their Russian president may be moving in areas unexplainable, that the war is far from being over. So sadly, please listen.
President Zelensky, First Lady, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Mr. President, it's been nearly 9 months of this war now. Did you expect it to last this long? Do you have any idea of how long it might last?
Дякую за запитання.
Thank you for the question and thank you for the meeting.
Ви сказали,
You asked whether I thought this war would last so long. No, because I didn't start this war. And I'm sure there isn't a single Ukrainian who knew what this will be and what tragedy this would bring to every home in our country. Because I repeat, we did not start this war, but Ukrainian society united and showed that it was ready for what unfortunately was such a tragedy, showed that it was ready for these challenges. I was really impressed by the power of one nation and was impressed by the swiftness of the response of Europe, the whole world, and the whole international community that rallied around Ukraine for this challenge.
First Lady, what motivates you to get up in the morning? How do you feel that you've endured this war?
Дякую,
Well, thank you. It's a big question. It covers many spheres of my life. And what helps me get up in the morning, surely, as you said, it's my husband's example. I know that if he endures, then I have to endure. If the day's begun, then we have to keep fighting. That keeps me going. It's not easy every day, but you need to keep running. You cannot stop. As Alice has said, in order to stay in place, you have to run even faster. That's why we run. And I get some inspiration from the kids, from the children. First and foremost, there are some ordinary things that every family is doing. You need to get your son ready for school. You need to make sure he has had breakfast. Well, unfortunately, I don't have the assurance that my child would go to school every day because of those strikes with missiles and drones. There's a lot of work, a lot of humanitarian projects that we will continue after the war. That helps a lot.
також підтримує.
Mr. President, I wanted to ask you how you react, and I know that you all monitor Russian casualties and Russian activity on the Ukrainian battlefield. But the Pentagon actually, as a very senior defense official said, and I'm going to quote to get it right, that Russia has probably lost half of its main battle tanks, used up most of its precision-guided weapons in this war, that 80% of their land force is bogged down here, is stuck here in Ukraine. Does that match your figures? And what is your answer to that?
Я думаю, що це більш-менш відповідає.
I think this more or less corresponds to reality. Although, frankly speaking, nobody knows the full reality, especially as regards personnel. Because nobody can tell you precisely how many people died. Nevertheless, we clearly understand that the artillery that was provided as assistance to us from the United States and Europe, it definitely had to break this initiative which Russia launched on us on the 24th of February. And we did break this military initiative. We stopped them. We deoccupied a large part of our territory. And this indeed was helped by the artillery and the new technologies. We never resorted to any of the lies that the Russian Federation produces about dirty bombs or nuclear challenges and so on. And I'm very pleased that we are working jointly and responding quickly to that. Straight after Russia's allegations, we invited the IAEA, and they verified everything and said it's just another lie from Russia. So I cannot confirm those numbers for sure, but I can say for sure that it is a stunning number, both in terms of heavy weapons and personnel.
Are their losses heavier than your losses?
Да, в 10 разів.
Yes, 10 times. I think so, approximately. I can't give you the exact numbers, but there's a very significant difference. Because our war tactic is not to throw people, because people are most important, not to use people as cannon fodder. And that's why it is very important to us, whenever we ask our partners for artillery or armored vehicles, that it is not just about the weapons, but first of all, protection for our military.
Madam First Lady, you just returned from a major tech conference in Lisbon, and I think the world has noted that Ukraine has used technology in a really innovative and effective way. What was your message there, and what do you want the tech world to do for this country?
Мій меседж був доволі простий.
Well, my message was pretty simple, and I hope it was heard. The people gathered there were people who pushed technology forward. These people have an impact on which direction technology and the whole world will move in the future. So my appeal to them was to choose a side what technology they will invent or design. Will this be a technology that kills or a technology that defends? Because we have a wonderful and vivid example. For example, Bellingcat recently conducted their latest investigation, and they found a group of IT experts from Russia, young people aged 23, 25. Before the war, they worked in private IT companies, and now they're targeting missiles at our buildings. And this is a choice, a conscious choice made by people who know this technology, who have the expertise, are narrow specialists. They chose to be murderers and terrorists. So my appeal to all those thousands of people gathered at the Web Summit was to make their choice from a moral and ethical standpoint as to what they will do in the future. And really, the technologies help.
Mr. President, what is the status of Kherson and the impending battle to retake Kherson?
Знаєте, таке серйозне.
You know, that's a very serious question. And I'll be frank with you, I'll try to answer it in a way that doesn't give you an answer, to be honest. Because these planned military actions, they are discussed in a small circle, but then they're executed in silence. And I really want to have an unpleasant surprise for the enemy and not something they're prepared for. So I'd like to apologize. But at any rate, our people and your public need to know that we're working on some very serious steps with a positive outcome for the citizens of Ukraine and all those communities that support peace in Ukraine.
The Russians are observed as digging in very, very hard, some 3 to 4 layers, all the way down to the south, to the port, to the sea. Do you believe that they're mounting a more serious defense of Kherson than perhaps of the other areas that you've liberated?
Вони дуже так і є.
That's right. They have a very powerful defense. And not only me, but our military headquarters, we met. And at first, we didn't believe that they would be running away from Kherson. I believe that this was just an attempt to draw more Ukrainian troops in that direction.
First Lady, We've heard of many Ukrainian children being taken over to Russia. We don't know really what's happening to them. Here in Kyiv and in the area, I've met and watched over the last few days kids who've been obviously traumatized by the war. The air raid sirens frighten the little ones. Kids who've been told to be quiet and hide quietly have difficulty speaking and communicating. Some kids have seen horrible things happen under occupation. Their mothers raped, for instance. Obviously, you're a mother, but you're very involved in the mental health aspect and with your foundation also with women and children.
По-перше, це велика трагедія.
First of all, it's a big tragedy that our children are being taken away to Russia. There's a large number of children who our social services lost connection with, and we can't find them. Sometime in summer, the Russians relaxed their adoption legislation. They simplified the procedure to adopt Ukrainian children, which is horrible, and we understand we'll have to fight for them, and we keep talking about it at all international forums. Currently, we have an agreement on the evacuation of 2 children's homes from the Odessa region, and there's already an agreement reached with Turkey. We're trying to save them in advance. But just 2 days ago, I heard the news that a children's home has been moved from the occupied territories in Kherson region. We cannot reach them, unfortunately. We cannot save them. But hopefully, the international community will help us return our children. Now, as regards helping those children who suffered psychologically from the horrors of war, now there's hundreds of these children already. And we can't even imagine what those children suffered, who had to bury their own mother in the yards of their homes, who saw their relatives murdered, who stayed in the basements of Mariupol. We can only observe them and try to help. And for that purpose, we are establishing a national program on mental health and psychosocial support, which I hope will have a lot of projects for kids. I can give you an example. Once, fairly successfully, I believe, we organized a camp together with Ukrainian psychologists and donors. There were 20 kids with psychological issues. We took them to a special camp where the tutors were psychologists. They spent 20 days in Spain under constant 24-hour psychological monitoring, and this therapy had wonderful results. The children who didn't speak started speaking. The children who had eating disorders who didn't eat at all, and there was a boy who never slept. The tutors had to sleep beside him because he could only sleep if there was somebody next to him. And indeed, we saw wonderful results. We want to scale up this project. We are supported by experts from Israel and Belgium. The next training destination for our specialists will be the UK. Very soon this month, we will be sending our psychologists and psychotherapists for training there. We choose the world's best practices for coping with PTSD.
I can see it makes...
You know, you have to ask the question, why is Russia even doing this towards kidnapping those kids? And that's exactly what it is. They're kidnapping them and bringing them back to Russia. I'm going to tell you what I think they're doing. They're brainwashing them. They're teaching them as a young age to be against that in which what their fathers and their mothers and their ancestors are about, because they're looking at this long term towards possibly this being a drawn out deal to the degree that eventually those children will actually turn on their own parents and turn on their uncles and their cousins and their ancestry over in Ukraine. That will eventually, this is my line of thinking now, that eventually will help the Russians if this thing goes, you know, way into the extended years of the Ukrainians basically surrendering because they're going to be influenced by their own children and their cousins and uncles and cousins and nieces and nephews towards either stopping the war or just basically surrendering to the Russian government. You'll be surprised how devious that these people really are whenever it comes to war. They actually wrote the book on war strategies going all the way back to the Vikings and before the Vikings, in how that they was going to strategize in coming out on top pertaining to their successes. I mean, whenever it comes to them, whenever it comes to their manipulative military, I guess you would call it tactics. I don't know if that would even be the right word to use, but these people will go to the extremes of doing whatever. I mean, whenever you get to looking at some of the movie clips pertaining to James Bond and some of the influences of the USSR towards how brutal and savagery that these people are against their own people, towards how that, people, get poisoned and get pushed out of buildings and etc. Those things ain't just imaginary. Those people really are that brutal. And if you defy their government over there, you're going to pay severely for that type of resistance, because they look at that as it being a treacherous act against their original concept that they had going all the way back into the Vikings and the Mongols and all the other wars that they've ever initiated in their lives. You keep in mind that whenever children go to school in Russia, it's mandatory for them to go through a certain military perspective of their education. We don't do that over here. We want to keep that type of brutality, as far as being vicious in that perspective. We want to keep that away from our children over here, because why? Because we know that that also carries a heavy burden pertaining to people that can't relate, pertaining to the things that they have to do versus the things that they're engaged in doing towards wanting to do. And a lot of times people, this is what I've heard coming from the psychiatric communities over here, that a lot of times the people can't separate or deviate the differences. That's the reason why whenever so many of our military personnel come back from being on the front lines in one tour, two tours, or whatever tours, they have to go through a certain process before they're ever allowed to go back out on the streets towards becoming a civilian again. They have to be debriefed. There are certain things that they have to do and respond to. There are certain questions that they have to ask. There are certain steps that they have to take before the U.S. military is going to let their own people come back out into the civilian life. Why? Why is that? Because they know anybody that has ever been on the front lines in seeing that type of vicious brutality, it turns them into something similar towards a wild animal, like a tiger or a bear, because now their whole concept of survival had to change all of a sudden, similar towards what went on in the paddies of Vietnam, of whenever them guys come back over here. We've seen a lot of emotional stress that even to this day they're still suffering the consequences thereof, because the suicide rate here in America pertaining to our military is so high. It's really, really sad whenever a country or a nation has to divert to war just to be able to survive. And it's one thing if you're being picked on and that is basically your only basis for survival, is because if you don't do that, you stand a chance on being overtaken. That's not the case with Russia. Russia has already done proven its abilities towards being self-sufficient in survival. So what they're doing now to the Ukrainians is, in fact, very, very unethical. It's immoral. It's not just. I believe that there's a deeper concept to what they're doing other than wanting to bring distress and harm and hurt to the Ukrainians. Myself, I think that they're just going to use them for some sort of a stepping stone, using them as a pawn to be able to achieve what they're really wanting to achieve, which very well may be world dominance. You're talking about superiority complexes here that has been built up through generations and generations of people. You're talking about people that teach their kids how to become vicious animals. More vicious than a bear or a lion or a tiger. That's their normal concept in how that they live and what they thrive off of. So to see them kidnap these children and take them back over to Russia, it does not surprise me at all, because they're looking long term towards possibly using these children, weaponizing these very children towards using the children as a pawn to be able to achieve what they want to achieve with the Ukrainians. I'm telling you, there is no red line in how far that these people will go in achieving their objectives. And if you don't believe me, study them, look at what that they have done in the past. They're very, very aggressive, monstrous type vicious vigilantes per se. And once they get their mindset, we think that the deal over there in Ukraine and not Ukraine, but Iraq and Iran and all them other places in the Middle East, we think that their tactics are horrible, and which they are, towards using basically terrorist tactics in suicide vests towards achieving their objectives. Whenever you're dealing with a group of sheep herders, that's probably about the best that they're going to be able to do, other than the fact of this last mistake that we made towards leaving all that military equipment over there, towards them retraining and becoming advanced warriors. But even at that, it's going to take generations before they're ever going to be able to achieve their objective, providing that they even have the capability of doing that. You're talking about people that's basically lazy. They can't think for themselves. You're talking about sheep herders. You're talking about people that have been used to being ordered around, pertaining to the Middle Easterners over there. A great deal of them, the majority of them. And really and truly, they're not that big of a threat, other than possibly Iran getting nuclear warheads, providing that they don't already have something like that. Of course, it talks about the mighty war of 200 plus million troopers that will invade over into the river Euphrates, to the degree that the blood will become as deep as a horse's bridle there towards the end, pertaining to the last and final war, the war that the Husseinis continue to keep bragging about, as far as the war of all wars, the war of Armageddon, that will lead into Armageddon. These are very, very serious concepts that the Russian government and people have already studied, deciphered, and looked at, broke apart, tore down, and deciphered in the degree that they know that if they're going to be a progressive superpower, ultimately in the end, other than using nuclear armament, they're going to have to be top notch whenever it comes to these type of brutal, barbaric, vicious tactics. And don't think for a second that they won't kidnap your children right in front of you and you'll never hear from them again. Don't think for a second that they won't tie you to a tree and constantly rape your mother or let your father watch while his wife is being raped and then kill the mother right in front of the husband, and then do the very same thing to the children. These people actually fit under the guidelines in their barbaric heathenisticness to the degree of what the red man used to do to the Europeans back years and years ago, whenever the Europeans was coming over here towards, pouring molasses all over them and letting red bees swarm, or red ants eat them alive, or bury people in the ground and leave nothing but their head out, and then put toothpicks on their eyelashes and have their face facing the sun to the degree that it basically blinds them, or doing some of the other heinous, barbaric, cruel things that we have read about, that not only the red man is capable or was capable of doing, but also the Vietnam soldiers over there that would put let's say 100 men on a raft and then pull the plug on the raft while the water was steadily sinking and going over their heads and basically killing all 100 or however many it was on the raft, basically killing all of them in a very, very slow death like that, or shooting at the soldiers as they was dropping out of the airplanes, pulling the cord on the parachute and shooting them down and basically turning them into grinding meat before they ever hit the ground. You'll be surprised whenever you're talking about war. You're talking about some of the most heinous, cruel, insensitive, barbaric things that has ever occurred on the planet. There's a reason why that the Russians are kidnapping these children. They're not kidnapping these children because they feel sorry for these children. No. You better reevaluate your thinking if you're thinking that. Their concept is purely superiority, domination. And they will do whatever it takes to achieve their objective.
Very sad, both of you. I can see you listening to your wife, and this assault on the children is difficult to take.
З цим важко жити.
It's difficult to live with
Я
this.
вважаю,
I believe the main thing is not to get used to living with it, but to fight it, as Olena said, with various programs.
Mr. President, you've obviously heard there are all these articles being written, there are these foreign policy analysts who are saying, isn't enough already for you? Should you go to the negotiating table? Some of these countries with economic pressures on their own who are supporting you now, are you feeling any pressure to go to the negotiating table?
Дивіться, вони не хочуть.
Look, they don't want this war to be finished. Now, before having any fatigue, everyone has to understand that it's only the Kremlin and only one person, the head of the Russian Federation, who's not tired of the war. He might be tired of life in principle because of his age, but he's definitely not tired of the war.
And whenever he talks about he ain't not talking about one person. He's talking about a whole regime. He's talking about the Russian government retaliating because why? Because their oligarchs feels like that they got cheated and that we violated their principles pertaining to bringing in the United Nations, surrounding them with the United Nations and the United Kingdom pertaining to that. They obviously have a monkey on their back, they have a burr under their saddle, and it ain't just one man. If it was one man, they would have, the rest of them would have done already eliminated him. So this is obviously a regime move between basically all of them. There's only been a few of them that's resisted, that spoke out, and I'm sure those that have, they have probably already suffered great consequences on speaking out, because these are the type of people that, even though you may have protection around yourself, if you speak out, they're coming after your children. They're coming after your grandparents. They're coming after your parents. They're coming after your anybody associated directly in your life, to weaponize that to get to you. That's how they perform. They are vicious. They will do whatever it takes to achieve their objective. So whenever he says one man, no, they only have one speaker. They only have one leader. They only have one vicious head. They're the one that basically sits on the mantle that everybody can see and hear. But don't think for a second that Putin isn't being influenced by all them other people that basically has the same objectives. No matter what. I still think that it had something to do with COVID. I think that COVID pushed the oligarchs over the edge because they couldn't handle the indifferences and the burden that fell upon to their government, the way that our government performed over here and other governments performed. I think that it pushed them off into the red to the degree that they got to thinking, we're going to have to make up our losses some way or another, so the best thing that we can do is do this. And I guarantee you, they have got like 4 or 5 different plans to where if we achieve this, then we can achieve this, and we can go to this, and we can achieve that. Stepping stones. That's the way they think. They will sacrifice their own to achieve what they want to achieve pertaining to the heads of their estate in doing what they want to do. They're evil. Ronald Reagan pegged them right to the core whenever he said, ordering Gorbachev basically to tear down that wall. It was a very, very bold move by the American government. It was very, very bold move by Ronald Reagan saying what he said pertaining to accusing the USSR towards being an evil, evil empire in the way that they have achieved what that they have achieved in bloodshed. And Ronald Reagan pegged it. They really are an evil empire. But now there's other evil empires out there that's similar, if not just as bad, towards their brutality tactics of what they're willing to do to their own people to achieve their objectives. As I have said before, it has reached a level, looking at it from a global perspective, that there's entirely too many cooks in the kitchen. And everybody wants to be the king of the mountain. And everybody wants to show their superiority towards, we're going to be the leaders and we're going to be the dominators of the world. The same type of hideous thinking that even Hitler and his regime basically initiated during the time that they was trying to dominate the world in a very brutal, evil, domineering, vicious way. And these are things that our American military needs to think about, because if they can't settle this fire down pertaining to what type of damage has already been done towards it basically being an ember, it could actually turn into a fire. It could actually turn into a major calamity on a worldwide, global scale if you get enough suffering with enough people, and people are determined towards this is what they're going to do, this could turn into a world war. I hate to say that, but it actually could. And if so, this is just the beginning phases. This is just a prelude to what's yet to come. If they can't realign towards having alliances come in and figure out how they're going to settle this without tearing one another apart. The Bible is very clear in how that it talks about that as you shall see the days approaching, that no flesh shall be saved, but for the elect's sake whom he has chosen, that those days would in fact be shortened. Whenever you take a group of people that's basically starving because the forces of nature is no longer cooperating with the planet because of what the planet has already done to itself by initiating this type of activeness in how that our rivers and streams and watersheds and waterways and contributaries are drying up. Whenever you have a group of people that's basically dying of starvation, then you're going to see a whole new different concept in how that people thinks and how that people responds and what that people does. And whenever it talks about the river Euphrates over in the Bible that it's already been predicted in drying up, for surely to God, some of our scientists and some of our theologians, preachers and teachers has already looked at this towards figuring out, hey, if a body of water that big, which is one of the biggest body of waters, river moving waters in the world, if that's going to dry up, what's going to be the characteristics to all the other rivers and all the other bodies of water all over the planet? Because something's going to cause the river Euphrates to dry up. And I promise you, it's not coming from the sun. The sun is part of it, pertaining to how that the forces of nature are not producing that water of replenishing back on top of the earth. But I feel like that the earth is basically warming up from the inside out, and it's evaporating. It's escaping. It's the same difference of taking a pan of water and putting it on an eye of a stove and watching it continually steam and steam and steam until eventually you have no more moisture to steam. And guess what? It's empty. Where did all the moisture go? It went up into the atmosphere. That's where it went. If we are losing our fresh water supply all over the world, just as the Bible had predicted pertaining to the river Euphrates drying up, it will underscore the indifferences of how that these nations perform and respond to each other on a global level. Don't think that it won't become down and dirty in undermining their achievements whenever it comes to their survival. And that's how the Russians have been trained from day one. Like I said, it's mandatory for their children to go to military school. And I personally believe that we need to do the same thing over here in America if we're going to be a survivalist, self-sufficient country in remaining with our republic, that we're going to have to really think long and hard about where all this is leading to pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy. It's very clear that the Bible was put there for an advanced warnings of things to come, of what has already been pre-selected or prophesied to happen. And it's going to be our own ignorances if we don't take these things serious of what is already happening, what has happened, and what is predicted to happen. We're only arrogant and stupid if we think that these things are nonchalant and they're just going to gradually disappear or go away. Oh, they're going to disappear, all right. Disappearing as far as evaporation from the planet towards not only the river Euphrates drying up, but major corridors and watersheds and lakes and rivers and streams doing the same thing. Because why? Because the earth is reeking, the earth is hemorrhaging of that in which what we have done to her, that now these are the consequences towards not being alerted quick enough, and our scientists and our experts not taking the initiative of global warming pertaining to environmental crises and the things that we're doing to our planet on a level of seriousness that now we're starting to see just the beginning phases of all this. I don't even have words to express to our politicians in the past 30 plus years. I don't even have words to express to a great deal of our preachers, to a great deal of our scientists and meteorologists for the past 30 plus years that has allowed for this to get as far advanced as what it is before we as a society finally started looking at this in a very, very serious matter. If I'm not mistaken, they announced a while ago on CNN that Biden, our president, was fixing to go and join up with some sort of a big meeting over the environmental crisisness that's going on a global scale. I don't know what he's going to say. I don't know what he's going to do. I know that there's other smaller countries that aren't as rich as our country that are already begging for some sort of confirmation pertaining to helping out these smaller countries that are already suffering because of environmental changes. I don't know how far that's going to go along, because it wasn't like that just one or two people made this mistake. This mistake has been made on a global level. We're not just talking about American scientists or American meteorologists. We're talking about global scientists and global meteorologists that has let this slide into the degree of where it is today, that now we are seeing major consequences on account of it. Major consequences that will be irreversible from a global perspective. I mean, you're talking about damaging stuff that will take literally generations to replenish. Generations. Just like whenever a hurricane hits, I guarantee you there's places that hit in Katrina in 2005, which is 17 years ago, that to this day has never been built back or designed in the same format of what it was before Hurricane Katrina. And it's not just Hurricane Katrina. It's all these major events that happens to society, regardless whether it be floods or fires, that once it does its damage, it's gone. That way of life, those trees, those houses, those buildings, they'll no longer come back in the same way that they was. They may come back, but they won't come back the way that they was. Everything changes.
This person and the Russian political and military leadership need a pause. Believe me, they can feel it. They've begun to feel the effect of the sanctions. They have begun to feel dissatisfaction in their society. This person and all of them are afraid only of our society. These people unfortunately have no voice, because if they weren't afraid of going to the streets, they would exert pressure. And this is what the Russian leadership is afraid of. And then, for our part, we say, please, respect our principles of the UN Charter. Please respect our territorial integrity. Please respect our people, our rights, our freedom, our land, and our choice. That's it. So this word, fatigue, is a big word. You can't get fatigued. So it's too early for all of us to get fatigued. But when Russia truly wants peace, we will definitely feel it and see that. But you know, you can't wish for peace with words alone. Words are not enough. Stop the war, withdraw from the territory, stop killing people, start reimbursing the damages inflicted on our country. Criminals must be prosecuted, so words are not enough.
It's kind of like wishing for peace. You can wish for peace in one hand and poo-poo in the other and see which one fills up the quickest. It takes an active movement for a group of people to work upon themselves to establish that peace. And right now here in America, we're hemorrhaging amongst ourselves because of all these criminals and shootings and killings. And until we tighten up our laws and buckle down and prove to these criminals that there is going to be consequences for doing what you're doing, it's just only going to continue to ravage our own people.
Do you still stand by what you said a few months ago, that you would not negotiate with Vladimir Putin?
Його пропозиція.
His proposal has no substance as regards ending the war. Other than ultimatums, I've not heard anything from the current president of the Russian Federation. Starting from the 24th of February, there have been only ultimatums: denazification, denationalization. Every issue they raise starts with a D. They always want to deprive us of something violently on our own land. So I said that I'm not going to talk to this person if this person conducts these sham referendums and recognizes all those sham authorities that they set up as legal. We said this clearly, and I said that if they do that, then this means they don't respect our people, our sovereignty, our rights, and our freedoms. What is there to talk to them about? But I haven't closed the door. I said we would be ready to talk to Russia, but with a different Russia. One that is truly ready for peace. One that is ready to recognize that they are occupiers, ready to reimburse our people. That's not about money. They need to return everything: land, rights, freedom, money, and most importantly, justice. To parents who lost their children. Money is not enough. It's not a priority. Bring back justice. And so far, I haven't heard statements like that from the Russian Federation, either from Putin or from anyone else.
In other words, because they have showed themselves the way that they have in the past, pretending to disrespecting them the way that they have, they're no longer to be trusted. And he knows this. Their whole regime is not to be trusted. Even if they did agree that they was going to do something, you can't put trust in people that's went in there and slaughtered you like that. Went in there and kidnapped your kids and raped your children and your mothers right and your wives right in front of you, or your daughters. How can you trust a regime like that if the regime is still in power? That's what he's saying. He's saying that the only way to have any type of true negotiations is for that regime to die. And that means for President Putin to die with it. That's what he's talking about. Because President Putin has taken on the role of being their leader. And until that occurs, I don't think the Ukrainians are going to buy into any type of foolishness in trying to negotiate with a bunch of terrorists. And you know what? If America was dealing with the same type of brutality, I'm pretty sure we would think the same thing. I'm pretty sure that we would think the same thing. Why would you not think the same thing about a group of people that had done already violated every war principle that's ever come into existence as towards desecrating children in daycare centers and maternity wards and parks and hospitals and bombing and killing civilian life and dismembering or taking out basically over 10 million people in your country that had to seek shelter elsewhere. Why would you not think these things? He would be a very, very foolish leader if he didn't think those things.
The issue of NATO is very, charged one. I'm assuming you're putting NATO to the future, but are you trying to get, and are you confident that you will get, security guarantees?
Україні потрібні гарантії.
Ukraine needs security guarantees. The world needs security guarantees for Ukraine because stability depends on it. And this relates to the fatigue you mentioned. After our victory, after peace, we don't want to come back to the same situation. And it might happen. As I told you, the current military and political leadership of Russia needs a pause in one form or another, just like with the Minsk agreement or some other agreements. They needed a pause. They would gather up their strength, money, weapons. They would get ready. They would lay out the information for their own society. And when all of that has been prepared, they start the offensive. Because there is only one goal: to destroy our independence. There's no other goal in place. That's why we need security guarantees. Absolutely, we want it. And we believe we have already demonstrated our forces' capability to the world by the level of training, by the resilience of our defense system. I believe that we're at that same level as NATO member countries, at least. And I think it would be fair if we were in the same security circle and same security alliance. Because there are no wars among NATO countries inside NATO. So for us, this is the most secure construct. But if that path is longer than we would want it to be, unfortunately, through some personal attitudes of the leaders of some countries, again, I'd like to stress the leaders, not societies, because all the societies definitely support us. If that path is longer than we can afford, then while on this path, we would need security guarantees to be able to reach NATO membership, because everyone keeps saying that the doors to NATO are open, but you need to reach these doors.
I'm going to ask you this because you went not so many months ago to the Congress, actually. You also met with President Biden, you met with the First Lady, and you actually said, we need weapons, send us the weapons. Do you feel that you have the weapons now to actually win? Do you feel that NATO is here to help you win or just to stop you losing?
I think the president knows better how much more we need. I'm sure we need much more. But as a citizen of Ukraine, as a mother and a wife, I can feel that we need it. Because the missiles keep coming. When they stop coming, when our people stop dying in their beds in the morning, I will feel, okay, maybe that's enough. But we can't wait for Russians to run out of their supplies. It would be wonderful for them to run out, but I guess that's fantasy. That's why I asked to protect our children, to protect all of us. It's hard to live under this burden every day, when you don't know what will happen tomorrow, when missiles hit the crossroads while people are driving to work and get killed on the way. The other part of that missile hit a children's playground in Shevchenko Park. I literally walked there with my children when they were young. I'm really happy that it was 8 a.m. and there were no children yet. And I'm happy that my children are older and we weren't there. But this brings it closer and closer. So the question of weapons is a question of our survival, the survival of us and our children.
Mr. President, after all your powerful calls to the world for help, weaponry most especially, training, all that kind of intelligence help that you've needed, are they finally delivering what you need to win? And do you feel that you're getting enough to win or just not to lose?
Мені здається,
I think my wife answered it very well, but the answer is fairly simple. It's enough when you can no longer hear explosions. It's enough when the air defense system ensure no missiles hit the ground or buildings. It's enough when you're not being fired at and no missiles are launched against you, because Russia is working together with its partner, if I may call it that, with Iran. Since the 10th of October, we've seen them use around 450 kamikaze drones, attack drones, air reconnaissance, attack drones, kamikaze drones, missiles. Over this time, we've had over 2,500 hits. That's without artillery. 2,500 hits by drones, explosives, or missiles. That's a large number. Do we have enough defenses? No, I don't think we have enough at all. Is it enough to make 100 or 1,000 calls? Probably not enough either. Too few. But I'm ready to make 1,000 calls if every call I make results in more air defense systems. I'm ready to stay on the phone and just do that. It's difficult. A joint decision on the protection of Ukraine and Ukrainian airspace will definitely help us. And all the answers are there. I'm sorry, it's not even like the start of the COVID epidemic, when people didn't know what to do about it, when we needed to create a vaccine and it didn't exist. There is a vaccine against Russian strikes, and we know it. There's a vaccine against Russia, and we know exactly which countries have it and in what amounts. And I would say, frankly, there are even countries that have a surplus amount, from my point of view. So I guess, in answer to your question, there is not enough willingness, I would say.
What strength do you get from each other?
Яка сила нас утримує разом?
Not together, not together. It means how we help each other.
Yes, and what strength do you get,
What I have
from
from
each
you
other?
and
Yes.
what you have from me.
Yes.
I know what you have from me.
Exactly. You know.
If I can.
Yeah.
That is my love and that is my best friend. So that is my energy. I wanted to answer your question at the very beginning, when Olena told you like she prepared breakfast for the children in the morning and prepare clothes and etc. And what I wanted to tell you that, but I have no such possibility. So nobody gives me breakfast in the morning. I mean that it's such difficult period.
Because you're
It's good that they still have a sense of humor throughout all of this, being terrorized the way that they have, and there are people being terrorized. But even being a strong leader, just like Abraham Lincoln, eventually these things will have a toll on a human being's life, even if he was designed by God himself of being a strong leader. Because to see the suffering of your own country be torn apart every day on a day-to-day basis will eventually get to anybody. I don't care how mentally strong or prepared that you thought that you was. And keep in mind, this guy here, he was a comedian before the people decided to put him in power over in Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure he had no idea that he was fixing to be involved in something this dramatic for this long of time. Who would have thought that somebody went over there and started genociding these people like that? Unbelievable. And I'm pretty sure that they draw their strength from freedom. They draw their strength from knowing the taste of freedom. They draw their strength of knowing that what they're standing up for is in fact right and just. And they draw their strength of knowing that the things that the Russian government is wrong. It's wrong ethically. It's wrong militarily. It's wrong in every way that you can think of. And like he talked about, these criminals must be punished if you're going to see justice. There has been a travesty that has occurred here, and you can laugh all you want to, but I put a great deal of the problem here in America because the American churches never wanted to initiate the manifestation of biblical Bible prophecy in the way of actually initiating it. They talked about it. Oh, we talk about the Antichrist. We talk about the one world government. We talk about the New World Order. We talk about the opening of the seals. We talk about the manifestation of Daniel. A matter of fact, as of yesterday, I was talking to somebody at Walmart. I don't know who it was. Didn't know his name. I could tell he was a religious man because that's one of the first things we started talking about. And he said, according to his understanding, that there was 4 heifers that had recently been sent to Jerusalem to be inspected. And he said, usually whenever that occurs, the perfect red heifer, that's to be sacrificed during the time of biblical Bible prophecy of the temple that's going to be basically desecrated by this form of Antichrist, this devil, this Luciferian Lucifer. He said usually it takes about 2 to 3 years before they can finally dissect that this is in fact the one that they're going to use towards it being the perfect heifer. Because whenever they say a perfect heifer, they mean not a blemish pertaining to having any other DNA pertaining to the color of the hair of the heifer other than it being red, according to biblical Bible prophecy. Now, even so much as, I hope I get this right, even as much as a few years ago, rather than me putting a timeline on it, I'll just say a few years ago, there was already a great deal of concern about the red heifer that had been drawn into the equation towards going over to Jerusalem and being studied, just like the equation of building the temple back. But I don't think that there has never really been an urgency of doing that. And why there hasn't been an urgency of doing that is the same reason why that there wasn't an urgency towards supporting the Windmill Ministries missions back 30 plus years ago, whenever I first stood up in the eyes of the general public towards seeing the manifestation of the Holy Spirit bringing a temporary utopia or peace up onto the planet, just like it talks about in the Bible. Why was there never an initiation towards that? I'm going to assume that it was probably for the same reasons why whenever I started talking on live radio over here in Union City on WENK, in which I don't even know if WENK even exists anymore. I think they still got an AM radio station over there. I don't think it's the same pretense. But I was told within the 3rd or 4th session, get off the airwaves or we will shut you down. Seek employment elsewhere. If you don't, shut up, was what was thrown to me whenever I was working for auto builders in Dresden, Tennessee, under the leadership of Jimmy Atkins, that his uncle was Mr. Wooten that owned Wooten Chevrolet Garage. So the resistances of the Windmill Ministries didn't just recently begin. It just didn't begin whenever I come back here in 2014. It began years and years ago whenever I first started telling people and giving people out this information and giving them my testimony of this individual that is now walking around in his fleshly body. And to think that whenever I first come back here in 2014, that I purposely looked up Billy Wally. That was one of Tiny Sue's son. His brother was a mayor up here in Sharon, Tennessee for a while. I think he also had another brother. I may be exchanging the genealogy a little different than what I should, but I think he had another brother that played down here at Loper's Lounge for years and years and years down here in Dyersburg. That played in a band. Well, one of the first things that Billy Waddy had to say to me was, Juby, I do not believe that you have met the Antichrist and that you have been chosen by God to do this. He wound up marrying one of the Feeney girls over here in Cydonia, Deborah Finney. I don't know if they're still married or not. I think she works for Simmons's bank, towards one of the corporate banks. Or she was. I don't know if they still are. I don't have no idea where he's working. He may not be working. He may have already semi-retired. But that was the type of resistances that had been built up throughout the years. Whenever I come back, that was being slammed in my face, along with this particular neighborhood around here that was standing up against this, because they wanted me to tuck tail and run, and they wasn't going to hear anything about biblical Bible prophecy or the mistakes that had been made. Wasn't going to have it. Just like throughout all the 30 plus years that I've ever stood up for this ministry, that God had basically ordained me to help to orchestrate. It's not in the name of Juby or the name of Dennis Jackson. It's in the name of the Windmill Ministries for a reason. I don't believe that Jimmy Swaggart's ministry should be under the name of Jimmy Swaggart. I don't think that Oral Robertson ministry should be under the name of Oral Robertson. I don't think that the Billy Graham ministry should be under the name of Billy Graham ministry, because it's not their ministry. It's Christ's ministry, if it's being performed in the way that it should be performed. Joe Osteen, he shouldn't have a ministry named after him. Pat Robinson, years ago, shouldn't have a ministry named after him. Is there something special about all these people that I just got through mentioning? No. They're not any different than you and I or anybody else. They're messengers of God to distribute a message from God. And just because they're messengers, don't make them God. And if you're not God, why should you have an organization named after you? I don't think it's right. I could have named this ministry Jubilee's Ministry, or Jubilee Ministry, or something like that, or Jackson's Ministry. That's not what God directed me towards. I could have went on a fasting ceremony and built an altar right down here at Beech Ridge in Obion County, or Weakley County, or Gibson County. I could have went to Natchez Trace. I could have went to 1,000 other different parks and done what I done, rather than direct my efforts into Land Between the Lakes. I kind of felt like, at first, whenever I was first motivated towards going up there, which I knew nothing about the history of the TVA and all the flooding. I mean, I knew some of it that happened, but I didn't know the extent of it towards what went on up there in Kentucky, until I got up there and I got to investigating and going to house to house, listening to testimony to testimony. But I had no idea of the pain and suffering that had went on up into that area. But originally, I felt like, now you may laugh at me whenever I say this, but I felt like that because it was considered a federal entity, pertaining to it being a federal park, because it oversees two different bodies of authority, pertaining to part of it's in Kentucky and part of it's in Tennessee, that would have guaranteed me of not having as much resistances as I would have had if I was to have went to Natchez Trace, or I was to have built an altar down here in the Obion Beech Ridge bottom, or over towards Gooch's, over towards the old Davy Crockett bottom, or somewhere. I felt like going to a federal entity was giving me security that they wouldn't have been able to have violated me. Come to find out, that was the reason why they did violate me, because it gave the long arm of the law up in Kentucky that much more power over two non-threatening telephone calls that was in the span of a 90-day period. Who would have thought that they would have initiated a federal warrant for each call that, according to their law books, covered the distances of 1 to 5 years per call, because now they was pursuing a stalking charge onto my life, like I was purposely stalking Mr. and Mrs. Hawkins, or purposely stalking some of their military personnel that worked for Land Between the Lakes. I wasn't purposely stalking nobody. I was just trying to do my job according to what I felt like that God had passionately given me the sincerity of doing. And to think that I was attacked and lied upon and violated by the Kentuckians up in Kentucky, not just in Land Between the Lakes, but basically all of Western Kentucky, Grand Rivers, Calvert City, Benton, Kentucky, Aurora, Kentucky, Murray, Kentucky, Livingston County, and parts of where Paducah, Kentucky is. To think that I would have been violated that way, to this day, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what type of America that America really is. Because I was always under the pretense, just like whenever we went to war in Desert Storm and Desert Shield, that our whole concept was to try to eradicate the axis of evil, which that's the whole primary purpose for our laws over here in America, is to punish the people that want to break the laws, and also to try to rehabilitate the people that's broken the laws. That way they won't get out here and do it again. Because obviously it says in the Bible, "Thou shalt not steal." Why did they go to jail for? Well, they went to jail because they was a thief. They went to jail because they was violating our laws. They went to jail because they was raping. They went to jail because they was murdering. They went to jail because of the things that the Bible talks about that we're supposed to be against and for the commandments of God. And to think that I was roughed up the way that I was roughed up in front of not only their state courts in 2007, but their federal courts in 2009. Hang on, in 2010, let me get the years right. And then I was roughed up again in 2012, whenever they decided to put out 2 warrants for my arrest and go all the way to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, while I was making $2,000 a week after me renting out a house and having my life put together and paying federal and state taxes for the state of Oklahoma. And to think that these people done me the way that they done me, and they think that they're still going to get away with it? Lord, Lord, Lord. Talk about injustice. That's exactly what this individual right here is talking about right here. The leader, the president of the Ukrainian government is telling you quite blankly there is no middle ground in what Putin and the evil empire has done to the Ukrainians. They are not to be trusted. They are not to be liked. They are not to be dealt with. They are not to be negotiated with until there's a brand new regime. And the only way that you're going to actually get that regime, unless there's really, really bad blood to be spilt. And whenever I say bad blood, I'm talking about a third world war. I'm talking about the lives of millions of people that's going to wind up being collateral damage on account of all this, is for their own people in Russia to attack that evil empire like Ronald Reagan was talking about, in trying to bring that regime to its knees. Just like the people over in Iran that's going up against the Ayatollah Khomeinis, that until the people bring that regime down in how that they have been treating their own people, there will never be peace in that land over there. And there'll never be peace between Russia and the Ukrainians until that regime falls that he's talking about pertaining to President Putin. That's what he's saying. Because the blood's done been spilt. We're not talking about some sort of a war that you play in a video game. We're talking about real lives that has been destroyed. We're talking about homes. We're talking about communities. We're talking about streets and bridges and buildings that have been desecrated by this freaking idiot over there. And now you're wanting this guy to what? Buddy up with him? Become his partner? He's letting you know there is no middle ground pertaining to negotiating with Putin. And you know what? I don't blame him. Because if somebody would have come into my community and blowed my streets up and my bridges up and blowed my country up and desecrated my people like that, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with them neither. So this thing may go on for quite of a sum of a long time, unless the people in Russia decides that they're going to overthrow their own government and their own military, unless there's a movement that comes within the military or within that circle that's that close to Putin. This thing could go on for years. It could actually initiate into a third world war. I hate to say that, but it could. I don't want that. I don't even think this leader of this government pertaining to the Ukrainians, I don't think that he wants that. And believe it or not, I really think that not only the church world had something to do with this, of not exacerbating the prophecies of the Bible pertaining to how that it talks about the river Euphrates drying up and all these other water sources, and pertaining to the opening of the first seal, pertaining to the War of Armageddon, and pertaining to the two witnesses that are to meet over in that temple that they're supposed to be building, pertaining to the two heifers. And if you've never studied true biblical Bible prophecy, the things that I'm talking about pertaining to the Bible are probably going to go completely over your head. And you're not going to have a clue in what I'm talking about pertaining to the pure heifer being sacrificed on the altar of the temple. You're probably not going to have a clue in what I'm talking about. And if you don't, that's fine too. And maybe if you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe it's time for you to get in depth in studying what biblical Bible prophecy talks about as far as end time events that is predicted to occur. As of right now, I think Mr. Putin, let me back up. I think Mr. Biden, the American president, he's trying to make up for lost time because of various government officials here in America that has made horrible, horrible mistakes, as well as preachers, politicians alike. And he's going over to that summit meeting or whatever they're calling it right now pertaining to the environmental crises that's happening all over the world. It's undeniable. And he's trying to make up for lost time in getting involved in this and trying to get China involved in this and trying to get the world involved in this because of the mistakes, the travesty that has occurred here in America towards what should have happened that didn't happen whenever 9 tapes wound up going to the White House in 1989. Whenever the very movement of the Holy Spirit come upon Ronald Reagan, in Ronald Reagan going to the superpowers and convincing them that the world was not going to be destroyed by mankind, but it was going to be destroyed the way that the Heavenly Father had already designed it, predicted it, and selected it for it to be destroyed. But yet now, white man speaketh out of both sides of his mouth. Towards one side of his mouth said one thing, but then turned around and do just the very opposite. And in justifying itself, once more, this is what I just got to talking about a while ago. What did the Bushes and the Cheneys and that whole circle of our administration, way back then, what did they use for a cornerstone of initiating what they initiated towards Desert Storm and Desert Shield and other wars? It was to bring stability to that area, to liberate those people that was under that type of subjection, and it was to eradicate the very axis of evil. That was what they used for a cornerstone. The only problem was they was attacking the wrong people. They went to war with the wrong people. They should have cut the head off of the snake, the one that was financing all those terrorists over there, which wasn't the Afghanistans. It wasn't the Pakistans. It was the Saudis. And their underhanding, cutthroat, backstabbing achievements. And they thought that they had it in the wind, that they wasn't going to have any type of accountability issues in regards towards what that they had initiated of 9/11. Once more, you wonder how come that I am upset the way that I am over the oil, petroleum tycoons that have brought this upon to society. They have basically led us into the mouth of the volcano that now not only the Americans are suffering on account of, but the world in general. Like I said, I really believe that President Biden is trying to backpedal, and he's trying to do the right thing because he knows scientists and the meteorologists and the proof is there of what's going on, combined with the prophecies out of the Bible of the river Euphrates with all the other water resources here upon to the planet pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy basically unfolding itself right in front of our very eyes. And he also knows that the resistance movement began in the Reagan era because it was the Reagan era that wanted to pursue that because they had full confidence in what was going on was in fact of the holy righteous God, but they was back down. They was back down. They was told to shut up, settle down, and we'll handle this. It even went so far as driving President, excuse me for misinterpreting my names here. It even drove Mr. Ronald Reagan off into the estate there towards the last of his presidency, that they were saying that he was dementia, that he was basically losing his mind, and that he should take the back seat towards being on the mantle of everybody seeing him and hearing him versus him being on the mantle. And basically the last year and a half of Ronald Reagan's administration, if you know anything about their history of what went on in the White House, you'll know that it was Nancy Reagan that was basically operating and running the American government the last year and a half of Ronald Reagan's presidency. Something went on up there in the White House that to this day has not fully been explained to the American people, just as Donald Trump talks about that the full story in regards towards 9/11 has still not yet been discussed and disclosed to the American people. That come out of a prior president's mouth during the time that he was playing a golf game up here in New York that the Saudis was sponsoring at that time, that so many people reared up about. Why? Why did they rear up about it? Because those was the people that got directly involved with the horrors that happened during 9/11, and they was not going to have that right up underneath their noses, and they was kicking up about it because they wasn't going to have it. And you know what? I don't blame them. In them knowing the truth towards who sponsored and supplied and backed the Saudi Arabians. You know, the day after 9/11, a lot of these people that's living today that didn't experience that hands-on don't know this, but you got to do a little bit of research, but you'll find it. But the day after 9/11 occurred, while everybody was in total chaos and aviation was completely, totally shut down, no commercial aircraft to be flying during the whole space of the Continental, including Alaska. There was one aircraft that was given presidential approval above and beyond all other commercial aircraft, which was the Saudi Arabia family. That just so happens they was over here the day that 9/11 actually occurred. And to think that our American government tried to pull the wool over the American people's eyes and the world's people's eyes in allowing for that to occur, and to think that they was going to shuffle it around towards making it look like that it was over here instead of over there, is an act of treason. You know, they want to look at some of the things that Donald Trump has done towards him being impeached. That's basically treasonable. That even one of our Tennessee senators said that what he done was wrong, but it didn't deserve this type of punishment. What about the injusticeness that happened during Ronald Reagan's administration of the very things that I'm talking about pertaining to 9/11? Those people that was involved in government affairs at that time, they didn't get punished. They didn't get ridiculed. Matter of fact, I don't even think they got questioned. They pulled the wool over the world's eyes in not going after the true perpetrators. Just like after Ronald Reagan accomplished what he accomplished, and I pursued in 1989, my son and I, towards going on 3 different crusades up towards Washington, D.C. and New York City, and was trying to go and alert the American people, the public, whenever Desert Storm basically broke out, because I knew that he was going to war with the wrong entity pertaining to Saddam Hussein, that I was on my way to Washington, D.C. to bring clarity in all of that. And that's whenever Homeland Security themselves, working through the federal government, which was directed through, at that time, any federal judge is directed through the president, that they cooked up this idea, well, we'll just pin him down, because I went for like 10 days before I even had a charge. They didn't know what they was going to charge me with in Wheeling, West Virginia. I was just in their county jail after they arrested me. After Secret Service dragged me out of a hotel and stuck me in a county jail, I went for over a week before I even knowed what the charge was. You know what the charge was? Attempt of assassination. Heading to the White House to take out President Bush's life. That's what they cooked up. They got a judge convinced of what he was going to do. They got the public defender, Mr. Jolene Nugent, that's still living. I think she's retired now, but her agency up there is still with some other kind of lawyer's administration up there. But they got her to go along with it, along with 2 or 3 other people that was associated with 9/11 pertaining to dispatch. And they all cooked up this ideal, well, this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to say that Mr. Jackson made a threat, and the attorney that's representing him is going to question, because she knew that I had a recording of the very wording of the 911, the 911 tape while I was talking to the dispatcher, while they was breaking into my hotel and knocking down the door, Secret Service, Homeland Security. She had a tape of everything that was said, in the way it was said, how it was said, and when it was said. And it all lined up perfect with the 911 tape, because everything was being recorded from not only their side, but mine too as well. I was trying to protect myself. What was their excuse? Because there wasn't no information on the 911, the original dispatch tape? Your Honor, it must have been some sort of mechanical failure. But I know that I heard Mr. Jackson say that he was on his way to Washington, D.C., that he was going to kill the President of the United States at that time, which was Mr. Bush. Mr. George H. Walter Bush. I know I heard it. Everything else was on the recording, but there wasn't nothing even remotely close to me threatening an American president. And to think that they have brought this type of injustice into my personal life, and to think that they intervened with the ministry towards confiscating the first sword in 1989 up here in Madison County, and to think that they thought that they was going to get away with this pertaining to 9/11, speaks volumes of the type of people that has put us in this position to begin with. So do I blame this individual by making the remarks that he said that he don't trust that agency or that particular regime pertaining to President Putin that used to be an old KGB officer that worked for the original USSR? No, I don't blame him at all. Would you?
Because you're living apart.
Yeah.
Is it true that you said to President Biden when they offered to evacuate you at the beginning that you said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition?
Так?
Yes, that's right.
Ничего не...
Nothing changed. You know, my answer is still the same.
And I want to ask you another question, because I've noticed that Ukrainians are not afraid to poke the bear. So the bear is the Russian bear, and you guys are constantly poking on the ground in the battle, in the airwaves, in the Twitter accounts of the Ministry of Defense, all over. A lot of people outside are afraid of Russia and what Russia might do. Where did this come from?
Я вважаю, що...
You know, I think that Russia feeds on these fears. And I think this is a big mistake of the last few decades. Russia feels it has this power. The more you give it, the more it feels your fear. It lives by it.
Настільки давно.
I think historically we've been under pressure for so long, it's no longer scary. It's not even interesting. We just want it to stop. It's more of an emotion rather than a fear. The centuries of Russian Empire, then dozens of years of Soviet Union, with all these famines, with all the repressions, with all the expulsions of Ukrainians to Siberia and Kazakhstan. We've suffered so much from them that if we don't put an end to this now, there may be no chance in the future. This is our last stand. And when it is a last stand, we've all seen it in the movies. There's only one winner. And of course, our sole desire is to be that winner. Otherwise, we will have no future for this nation, because everything that's happening is elimination on ethnic grounds. All these calls for denazification, this is all about the Ukrainian nation being wrong, not having a right to exist. The Ukrainian language is not a real language, it's just bad Russian. It's all about losing the values. There are no values for humanity. This is something we can never put up with, really, because it would mean rejecting ourselves. Therefore, there is no fear. There is resilience. There's bravery. All we need is swifter and more powerful support than we're getting now.
Гідність така, от на українській.
And this dignity, Ukrainian dignity, is very important. And that's why we have this resilience. Russia keeps wondering, what's happening here? I don't understand why they're so keen to know what we're up to. I think they should be more interested in their own country, in their own history, in their own culture, to preserve it, if they still have it.
Do you think the women are getting enough support? Tell me what this says about your country, that there's a huge level of women comparative to other NATO countries in the military and actually on the front line.
Мені здається, що навіть
I think that the number of women who volunteered to join the armed forces, there's almost 40,000. That speaks for itself. These are the women who chose the path of the military in wartime, not in peacetime, when it would be more of a military romantic idea.
під час війни, не в мирні
There is a
часи,
shortage
коли
of purely female things in the uniform. There's only male underwear in the army. Women in the armed forces are still unique, but it's not unique in Ukraine anymore. And this whole war, it continues our path towards gender equality. And we've already made great strides in this. So this war is as equal as Ukrainian society. I'm certain that after this war, women's rights will be even stronger. We've already made strides, and we already have women generals.
Сміливості немає.
Bravery has no gender.
Thank you very much
Thank you so
indeed.
much.
Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Bravery has no gender indeed. And as you just heard the First Lady say, many of those females fighting for Ukraine are lacking the right stuff. And we visited a small hub here in Kyiv that has already delivered $1 million worth of kit just for women to the front lines. The NGO says its entire effort comes from crowdfunding and grants. At a nondescript storefront in Kyiv, covered with plastic against prying eyes, a major war effort is underway. Boxes of kit reveal a first of its kind. Fatigues designed for a mother-to-be. So was there never, Andre, anything for pregnant women before?
Never ever.
How many pregnant women are fighting the Russians?
I'm not sure that a lot, but there are.
Andre and Ksenia are married TV journalists in real life who now do this work. A female friend turned frontline sniper told them that she was pregnant and needed a new uniform. They're also sending female soldiers smaller boots, lighter Kevlar plates for their flak vests. On this day, Roxolana comes in for a new uniform. She's in an intelligence unit near the front and joined up in March totally unprepared. It's so valuable to have these people who understand that we are tired of wearing clothes that are 3 sizes too big, she tells me. We had no helmets, we had old flat jackets, we wore tracksuits and sneakers. Now we feel that we're humans. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense says there are more than 50,000 women under arms, more than 5,000 of them on the front line, amongst them Andre's sister.
She received men's uniform, men's underwear, everything that designed for men. About 35.
Females also need customized sanitary, medical, and humanitarian supplies. Ksenia and Andre have sent out 3,000 of these care packages. They've produced 300 uniforms and plan for at least another 2,000, all winterized. And then there's this vital tool. Oh my God, I have never seen that. A feminine urinary director for women of all ages. Well, basically, they pee in that, right? If there's no toilet.
Not in. They pee like men.
Look at that. Oh my God, if only I'd known that in all the years I was in the field. And as a parting gift, they throw in this book on resilience and courage amid battle and in captivity. Which is what happened to Alina Palina 5 months ago after the fall of Mariupol. She is part of a canine border guard unit, and like so many of the port city's defenders, she had been hunkering down in the giant Azovstal steel plant. She was recently released as part of an all-female prisoner exchange with Russia. We meet at this pizza bar run by vets. Were you prepared for life as a POW?
Готова я не була.
No, I was not, she says. And we discussed this a lot with the other women prisoners, that life hasn't trained us for such an ordeal. While in captivity, though, I said I'll continue my service and I have no plans to stop. Back at their private procurement center, Andre says he wishes he could join his sister, father, and brother-in-law all at the front, but a physical disability means that he's not eligible.
For a man, it's kind of hard to understand that you can't go there and your sister is there. So I'm trying to do my best here to help not only my family, but the whole army.
And the reviews from the battlefield are in. It's just amazing, says Anastasia. I'm happy as a child. The uniform is ideal, it looks great, and the fabric is very sturdy. Meantime, Roxolana's new boots are made for marching, all the way back to the front.
I like them boots. Had a zipper on them.
So this is important progress indeed. And just another note, in my interview with President Zelensky, you heard him call for more air defense systems. Well, the United States has just announced another security package for Ukraine that includes just that. Now to another pressing issue on President Biden's agenda, China. He'll meet with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Monday at the G20 summit in Bali, their first face-to-face meeting since Biden took office. And it comes as the relationship between the world's two largest economies has been increasingly strained. And Biden's climate envoy, John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, sat down with correspondent David McKenzie at COP27, the summit in Egypt. He says climate should be an area of cooperation between the two countries.
We're not formally negotiating at this point, but our hope is that within a short span of time, it will become possible for us to really get together again in full measure and do the things we need to be doing as the two leading emitters in the world and as the two largest economies in the world. China and the United States really need to cooperate on this, and without China, even if the U.S. is, as we are, moving towards a 1.5 degree program, which we are, if we don't have China, nobody else can make to that goal. And we blow through 1.5, and it will cost citizens around the world trillions of more dollars.
Politically, there is a sense that the US and China will be competing in the years ahead, and some hawkish attitudes towards China. Do you think the cooperation on climate change will be accepted?
Well, there's not any competition is a pretty normal thing in the world of business. Businesses always compete for market share, for product line, and so forth. What President Biden has said is we can compete, but we don't have to be confrontational. We don't have to be in conflict. And I think that's what is critical here, is that we deal with the issues. And there are real differences between our countries, obviously. But climate should not fit into that bilateral pattern of those issues.
U.S. climate envoy John Kerry there with David McKenzie. Now to a woman who is not afraid of speaking her mind, sports and cultural journalist Jemele Hill. She is no stranger to the challenges that come with being opinionated, black and female. From taking on President Trump to the NFL, she hasn't shied away from controversy. And she candidly relives those experiences in a new memoir called Uphill. Here she tells Michelle Martin about her difficult upbringing and the comments that nearly ended her career.
Thanks, Christiane. Jemele Hill, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You became a household name, at least among people who follow politics and sports, because of your outspokenness on, I guess, what we'll broadly call politics, okay? But this memoir is very personal. You describe some truly painful episodes, not just in your life, but in the lives of the people closest to you, your mother and your dad's years-long struggles with substance abuse disorder, your grandma, and some of the ways in which she clearly stood up for you, and some of the ways when she frankly, failed your mom, and by extension failed you. And so I'm wondering, for you, like, what was it like to sort of cross that bridge and decide, I'm not just going to tell it, but I'm going to tell it all?
I've always been able to have a level of vulnerability and honesty in my writing that frankly, it was hard for me to have in, sort of in speaking to people, if you will. And so, writing was always this place that was very safe for me. And I thought it was important, especially with certain like very serious issues, that you take the layer of shame off of it. As you know, there's a lot of shame in families, especially where sexual abuse has been pervasive or has occurred in these families. There's a lot of shame, a lot of hiding, a lot of secrecy. And as we have seen, that does no one any good. It's hard to heal when you can't even speak to it or speak about it or speak honestly about it, any of those things. And, the reason I disclosed that I had an abortion is not just about the moment that we're in here in America, in this country, when it comes to how we discuss abortion, but because I knew that there were a lot of women who were like me, who made the decision simply because it was just best for our lives. It wasn't associated with any trauma. It wasn't associated with a medical emergency. Made the decision because this is why that access is important. And this is what they felt like was best for their lives. And even when it comes to, navigating addiction within your own family, or even people who have suffered from addiction, there are people who, really feel as if they have disappointed themselves, their families, and, really have been unable to recover psychologically from what this abuse has done. And so my way of talking about how my mother and father's drug abuse has impacted me was to talk about it in such an honest way that those people who have been through those situations, they can relate to them and they understand not only just the mental space that I was in, it helps them understand the space that they're in and whether they're trying to figure out how to heal, whether they're still carrying resentment and anger. And I just think it's important to bring those issues to the surface because that's the only way that we can communally heal. And so for me, it was just about, showing people where the transparency and the honesty, just that how it could get you to such a much, much better place than you're in or think you're in.
A lot of people seem to want to think about sports as this kind of world unto itself. In fact, a lot of people will say, look, this is my escape. But your work, whether you knowingly, intentionally chose that or not, has always been identified with bringing the worlds together. The things that people are experiencing in their real lives become part of their sporting life. And similarly, sports and the way sports is a commentary on the rest of life. Was there a line that you sort of felt you had to cross yourself to give yourself permission? Or was it just you couldn't think of any other way to do it?
Yeah, I think it became a point where you just sort of can't think of any other way to have the conversation in sports. And you're right, is that people act like sports in the world are happening in two different universes, and they're in the same universe. And so therefore, everything that's going on in the world impacts what has happened in sports or what does happen in sport. And so the more I saw these collisions between race, politics, gender with sports, the more I understood that part of my mission was to write about these messy intersections, because it was actually a way of getting people to understand those issues much differently. We are a very segregated country. We do not do a lot of things together. We do not intermix a lot of times. But the one place we do is in sports, because you can have people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different nationalities, different genders, all be Laker fans, okay? And there are not a lot of things in this country that force us into that bubble with one another. And so why not use that opportunity to speak about issues a little differently or to write about them with that sense of awareness? It is why in many cases, sports has been ahead of the rest of society in terms of seeing advancement. Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball in 1947. That was almost 20 years before there was a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act, before we saw the crumbling of segregation in certain parts of our country. That had already started to happen in sports. And because people saw it in sports, I'm not saying it made them more open to it necessarily, but it at least provided a model that it could be done.
There's a saying, you can't be what you can't see. You have often been one of the few, if not the only, Black women in the position that you have been in covering sports the way you do. Did you always feel conspicuous?
Yeah, I was always aware. And I think when I was younger in my career and breaking certain barriers then, it felt more like a burden as opposed to a responsibility. My very first column job I got when I was 28 years old at the Orlando Sentinel. I was the only Black female sports columnist at a daily newspaper in North America. It was 405 daily newspapers in the USA, Canada, and Mexico, and I was the only one. And that was a lot for me to take in. I felt a lot of pressure. I felt a lot of scrutiny, and I think it showed up in my writing. Like I write about this in the memoir, the first few months I did the job, I wasn't very good because I was thinking too much about what other people were thinking about the fact that I had this job. And once I was able to kind of get rid of that, it allowed me to, find my voice and write to my standard. Once I got into broadcasting and saw that I was one of the few Black women in a visible positions, and the distinction of, by the way, of being a Black woman in commentary. I was not an anchor. So that means I was driving shows with my actual opinion. And that was not seen hardly anywhere. And yes, I also was aware then too, like this comes with a lot of responsibility, but it was a responsibility I embraced, because if my presence being on ESPN inspired other women that they could be in the same place and do it in the way that I was doing it, they didn't have to follow my exact career path, but they knew that there was more value to them than just being a sideline reporter or being a host and teeing up other people and us hearing their opinions, that there was a place for their actual voice.
You talk a lot about, you've kind of alluded to this, but I want to kind of go right at this. Let's fast forward to this idea of what happened when you criticized the former president, Donald Trump, in a series of tweets in 2017, where you referred to him as a white supremacist who has largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. Now, people think of this as a situation where you were suspended, but that was actually only a couple of hours, and you went on the air that day as per usual. What actually got you suspended were some comments that you made about the NFL. Subsequently, that's kind of what led to your leaving ESPN. On the one hand, these kind of major media outlets offer a lot of money, a big platform. On the other hand, it does come with, guardrails. And they get to decide what the guardrails are. And so when you think about that, like, how do you think about this now that you've got some distance from it?
I do think that when you are in traditional media, you understand the assignment and you understand what you signed up for. And ESPN is very visible. It's the most dominant sports media brand in America. But some version of that have been happening throughout my whole career. I don't mean just their response to it or, me finding out there are guardrails. Traditional media has always had those throughout my career. If you work at a newspaper, they tell you you can't put up any political signs on your yard, whether you're covering politics or not. Right? There are certain rules you have to abide by in order to work for this place. And that's the trade-off that you make, because you feel as if it's worth it, because you get to tell stories, you get to cover things, you get to impact the world with the content that you are creating. And eventually you get
to use their vehicle, basically their platform at that time, before social media platform come out. And because of it, they had certain requirements and guidelines. And if you busted or broke or violated those violations, you paid the consequences towards. Kind of the same thing of me going up here to WENK News and get to speaking about what I believed in interpreting the Bible towards end time biblical Bible prophecies. And immediately I was shunned, victimized, terrorized, dehumanized by all these churches around here. And that's the very reason why that I say to this day, because of the way that it has backfired upon a society, and I truly do hate it for the innocent. I do. I truly hate it for the elderly and the innocent and those that didn't have nothing to do with this movement. But for those that did, they're going to have a great deal to have to explain to the Heavenly Father one day towards the who, the what, the when, and the why. Beginning with our state governor that come from Weakley County, Tennessee, and all these other churches that took it upon themselves to listen to the very same content of different 9 tapes that was recorded during the time that I recorded 3 sets, that still did not actively pursue or act upon to it. They literally was convinced that they had won and that they had swept all this stuff under the rug, out of sight, out of mind, that it was a fluke pertaining to how that it originally come from me, pertaining to how the Holy Spirit come up onto me, how the Lord come up onto me, in me putting out my testimony the way that I did and sending it to the White House. I really and truly believe that they really and truly thought the same way as the Pharaohs, that they could win over Moses's true God. And they wasn't convinced until after one dilemma after another dilemma after another dilemma happened to them, till they finally gave in and said, you know what? Moses' God really is the real God. That's right. And you challenged that. And because you challenged that, there was consequences. I hate it that all this hardship has fallen upon to all these innocent people's lives, not only here in America, but throughout the world because of this. And I guarantee you, there are certain people over in Kenton, Tennessee, and Obion County, where basically my mother was raised up, and her 2 older brothers, where her mother lived for years and years and years, where they're buried at over there in Sunnyside Cemetery. I guarantee you, there's going to be certain people from the Wades to the Feeneys, to the Greens, to the Sandersons, to some of those other big rich farmers over in that area, as well as business people. Some of them are dead. Some of them are still alive, including their pastor over in the Church of God Church, that is recently as, I guess it was 2015, whenever one of their mayors died, and whenever some events happened in the Church of God Church, that to this day that preacher still refuses to acknowledge that ever occurred, towards putting it on recording, as well as their chief of police over there that now is retired, Miss Sheila. Her husband recently died. There are certain people that are going to give an account for the things that is unjustly done, beginning with the crosses and the kneels. Whenever Leroy Neal, sitting in his Dodge truck, was actively pursuing him and James Hill, that whatever you do, do not send these 9 recording tapes to the White House. That almost busted my eardrum as he was driving and parked his vehicle, screaming and hollering so loud that it damaged my left eardrum, pertaining to how that he was screaming and hollering towards trying to prevent from me sending these 9 tapes to the White House. I went through a resistance movement that I don't even know for sure anybody can even comprehend. Beginning in and during the mockery, whenever a great deal of people here in America was making fun of Jimmy Swaggart, and Jimmy Swaggart getting caught with a prostitute during a time that people over here in America was basically turning somersaults and cartwheels and laughing and hee-hawing, saying, well, he don't live a life no better than we do. Putting him down and degrading him. And then it wasn't long after that, here come the Bill Clinton deal. Wasn't long after that, here come the Waco deal. Wasn't long after that, here come the Oklahoma deal. Along with the Ruby Ridge deal. Along with the abortion bombings. And then the bombing over there in the Simia Park in Atlanta, Georgia. Wasn't long to here come 9/11. And it wasn't long to now where we are today, with the drynization of major waterways all over the planet. In addition to where we are today pertaining to a war over in Ukraine. Yeah, there's going to be accountability issues. Yes, I'm glad that I had enough stamina about myself that I stood up and I've told my story again and again and again in different intervals pertaining to my testimony by using social media platform. And yes, I'm glad that I had that same courage or courageousness as some of the other leaders throughout history here in America that has been willing to sacrifice all by putting out their story, just like this young lady that put out her story, just like whenever there was enough concentration on, I think it was the Ford Escort vehicles, that the original design where the wheelbase was too close together and they started having blowouts on these one particular brand of tire, and somebody was smart enough to pinpoint that and say, you know what, we got a problem here with this tire. We got a problem here with this vehicle. A lot of rollovers, a lot of people's dying. So sometimes whenever it comes to free, open, fair media, that is the answer to a democracy republic. That way all things can be laid out onto the table, and that way everybody can see from all different perspectives of different people's opinions and different people's views. And you know, they can argue all they want pertaining to the facts. They can argue all they want pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy of how that it's already been predicted for the Euphrates River and all the other waterways here on the planet to be drying up. But the fact is the fact, and you can't ignore history towards what has already occurred. You can try to. I've been accused many a times, you're dwelling on the past, you're dwelling on the past. Well, sometimes you got to figure out the past before you're ever going to be able to figure out the future. And if you continue to keep making the same mistakes again and again and again, guess what? There won't be a future. And I think that's what President Biden has finally realized pertaining to the environmental crisis with global warming and etc., combining it with the truth towards what has occurred with the Reagan administration, combining it with biblical Bible prophecy. And that's the reason why that he is so gung-ho, I'm going to use that word, towards trying to get his message out to the general public, especially those on the other side of the world, that this is real. This is real, and it's not some sort of natural occurrence, and it's not some sort of process that the planet goes through pertaining to seeing these changes alternate from one generation to another. This is actually occurring towards me personally witnessing the mighty Mississippi becoming 3 or 4 times as low as what it has just within the past week or so, in breaking all-time records, and knowing that it's gotten very, very low another 3 or 4 times, which puts it somewhere in the realm of about 5 or 6 different times in my lifetime that I have seen the mighty Mississippi starting to go dry, which was the very predictions that I predicted in the early 90s that God had showed me of these major electrical disturbances that would eventually lead into a bloody road ahead. And if you don't believe me, you can look at the statistics since basically 9/11 in how that the crime and how that the homicides are now increasing on a day-to-day basis. So you can't tell me that a mistake hasn't been made of a government that decided to go to the far left whenever they should have went to the far right. Good luck to all of us as we end this particular program right here on the eve of veterans, remembrance, and remembering our veterans of the sacrifices that they have made pertaining to our first responders. I'm glad that 2020 did not turn into what some of the critics was saying that it was going to turn into. I'm extremely proud that it wasn't a red wave that basically inundated this country, which helps to validate that the original election pertaining to the presidential election was in fact authentic. Was in fact authentic. Even though people are suffering through higher prices and paying higher gas prices and food prices, and even though the interest rate has went up the way that it has. It speaks volumes about how the people is finally acknowledging reality in the form that reality needs to be acknowledged, not just by our leader, Mr. Biden, but by about half of the nation that has stuck with the blue party. And even to this day, they still don't know which way this thing is going to turn and who's actually going to be in control, whether it be the red party or the blue party. But I do want to say this: regardless what party becomes in power in having more seats than the other party, if the government does not start working towards the will of the people in any government, then that particular body needs to be abolished, and you need to tear it apart, and you need to start all over again. Hopefully that will never occur to the level of what I'm talking about. Hopefully we can work out our indifferences, and hopefully we will better humanity in the futuristic future to come. Want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me record this pertaining to these very, very serious matters in regards towards the war over in Ukraine. I feel so sorry for them people that has had to experience what they have experienced pertaining to an evil empire. There's actually about 3 or 4 other flames right now, or embers, that are almost at the point of initiating themselves, including China going to war with one of our allies. I just hope and pray that there's enough sense within various governments that they're willing to do the right thing for not only each other, but to do the right thing for their own people. And it's very obvious that what poisonous Putin has done since February of this year has been contrary for the will and the betterment of his own people, much less the will and the betterment of the Ukrainian people, and that now has affected so many other lives that's beyond the borders of just that area. I want to say good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless our endeavors. I'm so sorry that for the past few years pertaining to putting out all the information that I put out on social media, that I've had to inject into political areas that, to be quite frank with you, I'd rather have stayed out. But because of this attack upon this ministry coming from political figures, and because there's really no other way for me to, I guess, kind of like weaving a blanket together, a quilt together. There's really no other way for me to weave it in existences towards not becoming somewhat political. I try to stay out of these elections the best that I can, and not being influential towards whoever's running for whatever side, because I feel like that my influences could possibly help to alter what the will of the people actually has decided to bring upon to their own selves. It's kind of like a sequence one time that I seen of an old Star Trek movie, to where Spock, Captain Kirk, and 2 or 3 other ones beamed down up onto the Earth. And the Earth was basically in shambles at that time because it went through a major nuclear war. And they was going to do something. I done forgot now what that they was going to do. And Spock basically told the captain that we shouldn't do that. And he asked why. He said because we would be altering their history. Now it was Captain Kirk, according to the sequence that I've seen, that finally related to this particular group of people, a tribe, that had found the American flag in all the rubble pertaining to we the people in regards towards the American Constitution. I don't want to alter our history, but at the same time, I don't want to see this great planet suffer in the form of a nuclear holocaust neither. Because of the urgency and because of the unfairness that has happened to this ministry that God has ordained, orchestrated me to be a part of, and because of the resistances being so profoundly open, coming from our courts and coming from our law enforcement agencies and coming from the White House pertaining to Homeland Security and various political figures, as well as preachers that claim that they want to go to heaven. But it's very difficult in finding anybody that's willing to die to get there. I have run up into an onslaught of resistances, not only with biblical Bible prophecy, but an onslaught pertaining to global warming. And if I personally didn't feel like that it was this urgent, I would not have been this public in making the videos that I have made for the past 3 or 4 years in embarking upon to my particular opinions about what's happening, of the things that I don't feel like that should be happening. But at the same time, I also realize that me as a sovereign citizen towards being an American should have that indignity right of being able to tell my side of the story, because according to the way that I understand our laws, that's one thing that America has that most countries don't, that we have that right to stand in front of our peers and to stand in front of our accusers and to voice our opinion and tell our side of the story and get others to listen to, hopefully, that will make their own decisions towards what was just and what wasn't just, and what was decent and what wasn't decent, and what was fair and what wasn't fair. Because I know if I would have been in Russia or China or some of these other communist-controlled countries, including Mexico, Honduras, Colombia, Cuba, and probably even Africa, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that I would have already been assassinated. And in ways, that would have been a whole lot easier for me, because I wouldn't have had to went through so much endless pain, so much relentless embarrassment, so much humiliation that wasn't just brought upon to just me, but was brought upon to my whole family in some form or fashion, including what went on here in Obion County and Weakley County, Cydonia, Tennessee, in how that various people allowed for James Robert Jackson's family to be nothing but a whipping post, while somebody basically out of their mind pertaining to my father that had post-traumatic stress disorder because of World War II, because of the scars of war, and because he had walked away from his original convictions with the Lord and become possessed with the devil towards letting the Luciferian Lucifer live within his life, and how that others sat back and was either frightened to death of my father or maybe enjoyed watching Mr. James Robert Jackson's family be destroyed right in front of their very eyes. I think I had that right to come back and to tell my side of the story. Do I have love for these people? Well, obviously I do, or I never would have come back. My intentions wasn't to come back to dig up old bones or to throw salt in the wounds. My intentions was try to educate these people and help these people. That way, hopefully, maybe this never would have occurred again in another family out here with a group of people that was obviously so prejudiced and discriminating to the degree that they was willing to let a whole family basically become destroyed right in front of their very eyes. In addition to the way that they treated an individual that was anointed by the Heavenly Father, that did make those 9 tapes, that did help to bring a solution to the global crisisness that was going on at that time towards ending the Cold War. I never would have thought that I would have ever had to have dealt with anything like this. I was abused growing up. I had to quit school. I was a dropout. I had to quit school. I had to get involved towards getting away from the farm and getting away from these abusesness. And of course, if you know anything about my testimony, you know that I struggled towards having a bad injury at the age of 19 towards falling off of a 4-story building. Do I love the people that I was raised up around? Absolutely. Do I wish for them to go to hell because of what that they either have done or what that they have not did not do? No, I do not. Is there room for reform? Only if they allow it. Only if they allow it. Because a good person can make a mistake, but it takes a better one to admit it. And I have yet to hear anything from any of these people within a 25-mile radius going one direction or the other that fully is aware of what I'm talking about that has yet to make a recompense. And you know what? As far as I'm concerned, they may not never make a recompense, and that's all right too. Because I know that true justice will come one day in the form of everybody standing in front of the Almighty pertaining to the great white throne judgment, and then the whole truth, nothing but the truth, will come out about all these incidences from A to Z. Whenever we moved down here in 1967. So good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless our endeavors. May heaven help us all. May heaven help us all in these relentless times that we're now living in. That I pray every day that there will be a mighty, mighty movement of God in a revival, and that we will one day see that utopia, that peace, that sense of stability that obviously has been taken from us. The security, the safety that now a great deal of people are suffering on account of because of a few individuals that decided that they was going to do this. Thank you. God bless you for your time. God bless you for your prayers. And as we say in ending, shalom. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be.
closer walk with thee. And God bless America. God bless. Oh, glory.